Netflix has made a name for itself with its reality TV series like Love is Blind, Too Hot to Handle, and The Ultimatum, to name a few. Shows like 90 Day Fiancé, The Real Housewives, Honey Boo Boo, these all had their golden age, and now Netflix is certainly becoming a rising star in reality television. So when I was told about Netflix's new reality TV show, Snowflake Mountain, I certainly was curious to see what was going on. The show was described to me by a coworker as two Republican men teaching Gen Z kids how to survive in the wilderness, which is partially true, but I don't think it quite captured the depth of what was happening on this entire show. It also could just be me. I could just be watching this far too deeply, but I think it merits a video essay. Spoilers ahead. So, what is Snowflake Mountain? Snowflake Mountain is a show about spoiled young Gen Z kids, aka snowflakes, that much is true. They're told by their parents that they have been cast in Netflix's latest sexy reality TV show, and they all show up Fendi purses in hand to enjoy themselves on an island villa. However, they are in for a surprise when the crew drops them off in the middle of nowhere with two survival experts and ex-military men, Matt and Joel. I haven't done much research on Matt and Joel, but as far as I know, they're just two ex-military guys with a survival business that they started together. It's unclear how they started the business together or how they even met, but that's their background. I can't emphasize this enough how much they are quite literally dropped in the middle of nowhere with Matt and Joel. Like, the entire first sequence of the show, besides defining what a snowflake is, which we'll get to that, is them wondering where the fuck they're going. Can I say fuck? It's my show, I can do it. So the point of the show is that their parents want them to grow and change as human beings, and so they send them to Matt and Joel to learn a little bit of, like, I don't know, self-respect. They all basically have different issues. Some of them have issues with authority, some of them are lazy, some of them are just plain uninspired people. So the snowflakes are then put to the test and challenged to stay for as long as possible at the campsite, which is really more of a glamp site considering the fact that they have, like, literal VIP tents. Like, when I was told that they get sent to a campsite, I was expecting, like, something a little bit similar to, like, what I would do if I went camping. But, like, no, they're just sent to this VIP campsite in which they are given cots to sleep on, like, really nice blankets, sleeping bags, lanterns. Like, I would not be surprised if they had heating. And, like, they arrive at this campsite and they are appalled at what they see because they see that they're going to be, I don't know, shitting in an outhouse. The kitchen's outside. Everything's outside, except for their tents, which once again, super nice. Nevertheless, the snowflakes are super appalled at what they see, they don't like it. One of them even quits before the prize money is even announced, or it's even announced that there is prize money. And that prize money ends up being $50,000. But of course, there's a catch. For every person that leaves the experience, which they have the option to leave at any point in time, for every person that leaves, $5,000 is deducted from the $50,000 prize fund. So this gives them some kind of incentive for them to want to stay because they could win $50,000. It also is an incentive for them to start working as a team, although that doesn't end up happening until, like, the middle of the season. We'll get to that. Because for every person that leaves, the prize fund gets lowered. So if they start working as a team, then more people would want to stay. And this doesn't really come up a lot, but let's just get it out of the way. Here are the snowflakes. Deandra, Ray, Liam, Olivia, who is the one who leaves within the first 5 minutes, so you don't really need to know who she is. Devin, who everyone seems to have a crush on. Solomon, and in my notes I just wrote bitch baby, despite the fact that we have the same name. Carl, Randy, Daria, Sunny, and Francesca, who we'll talk about later. Something that's really interesting is the fact that this show is pretty void of political implications, despite the fact that it has a very political and polarizing name. Snowflake Mountain has a lot of implications to it, and instead relies on the viewer to kind of fill in the blanks as to what a snowflake is, beyond a small definition given at the beginning and some clips of the contestants at home showing the fact that they are, again, lazy, spoiled, etc. Netflix's definition of a snowflake is a modern phenomenon, a young person who is considered overly emotional, easily offended, and dramatic. I find this definition really interesting because it is a basically watered-down definition, a depoliticized definition of what a snowflake is in modern vernacular. Like, one Google search led me to this. Snowflake, as a politicized insult, is typically used by those on the political right to insult those on the political left. In an article from the Los Angeles Times, Jessica Roy says that the alt-right in the United States pejoratively describes most liberals and those protesting against Donald Trump as snowflakes. It's also thought that Chuck Palahniuk, the guy who wrote Fight Club, coined the word snowflake in his book Fight Club. He wrote, "You are not special. You are not a beautiful and unique snowflake." And the 1999 film adaptation also includes this line. However, he later clarified that that's not necessarily what he meant. Like, it didn't really mean fragility or sensitivity. He instead was really railing against the participation trophy culture that he experienced in academia. He said, "A lifetime of disingenuous one-size-fits-all praise had kept most of my peers from pushing hard to achieve any actual triumphs, and therefore we had no internal sense of ability or potential." But one simple YouTube search really shows that this entire term took a life of its own, with every video under the search term pertaining to some sort of liberal meltdown. So from what the show lets us gather, these people aren't actual political snowflakes. They're people with no direction. They showcase behavioral problems, laziness, lack of motivation, lack of self-confidence. Many, if not all of them, are living with their parents, and all of them, period, have a awful attitude when entering the show. Rightfully so, because they've been lied to by both their parents and Netflix. And within the first 10 minutes of the show, all of their stuff, minus the essentials, is blown up. This is both the evil and the genius of the Netflix producers, because what they've done is set up expectations so that what we experience on screen is a total complete meltdown from the contestants. So when they go to a campsite instead of a fancy poolside villa, it is kind of obvious that their expectations are going to be shattered, and Netflix kind of encourages you to take delight in the shattering of these young kids' expectations. Kinda evil, kinda basic for reality TV. Matt and Joel, with the help of hidden surveillance, is able to see their expectations be crushed, and so you're kind of encouraged to take the same joy in that, but there is something kind of cruel about the first episode. But of course the editing tells us that the teens deserve it, that they have been ungrateful and spoiled and etc. for their entire lives. Many of their parents cite wanting the best for them in sending them off to this show. We'll get to more of that later though. I feel like I keep saying that. We'll get there. So this idea continues within the first couple of challenges, which range from rescuing food by lowering it by a rope, which they end up messing up anyways because half the team decides to steal from the other half of the team, to skinning an actual deer. So the skinning of the deer scene is actually rather interesting, as self-proclaimed New York party girl Devin is a vegan and is morally challenged by the task at hand. She and Kat, who is the wilderness expert on the show, have a really nice back and forth about the ethics of skinning this deer, but Devin ultimately decides to leave. You typically would think that this scene would be used as fodder for the show, as if to say, these kids can't do it these days. But Matt and Joel are totally cool with it because she morally stood her ground in an adult way and heard Kat out before she left. They do not, however, learn their lesson because they do keep feeding the contestants meat as reward, and thus Devin only can eat potatoes. And what we can learn from it is the fact that Joel and Matt are actually in it to help these kids learn something about themselves and not necessarily to make great reality TV. Which ultimately could be why the show is not Netflix's best, because no one's in it to make a great spicy TV show, but the kids kind of make up for that. Challenges like this are meant to show the snowflakes what they are capable of, while also helping them learn to work as a team despite all competing for the same cash prize. Some snowflakes, like Ray, take the challenges immediately, have great attitudes, kind of understand the concept of the show from the get-go, and this leads to her getting the title Wilderness Warrior, which is basically like having immunity in Survivor. However, other snowflakes like Solomon and Deandra, Solomon, once again, we're back to him, struggle to engage with the challenges, and then this leads them to being in the bottom two, and their version of the bottom two is kind of like Exile Island again from Survivor. Only this time there is no immunity idol, there's no culturally appropriative montages, or white people doing Tai Chi on the beach, and instead it is a thing called Last Chance Lake. So Last Chance Lake is basically where they're sent to a significantly worse campsite with thatched roofs and a campfire, and that's about it. And they are challenged to stay there for a single night. It is one night. But this one night is probably more grueling than they're used to because they're not in insulated tents, they're not in comfortable cots, they're literally sleeping on the ground in a sleeping bag with bugs everywhere. And of course they're there with another person who doesn't want to be there. But the thing about Last Chance Lake is that they are given the opportunity to quit in the middle of the night, quit both Last Chance Lake and the entire game itself, and stay the night in a cozy RV instead. Costing, of course, the rest of the cast $5,000 and a tasty breakfast for some reason. Yeah, like if they both get back from Last Chance Lake, they are getting a tasty breakfast. And if they don't get back from Last Chance Lake, they don't get a tasty breakfast. So like the other people are punished for some reason, but they don't tell you that until the morning of. So it's not like anything is at stake here except for like for those 5 minutes that they're wondering whether or not both campers are going to come back from Last Chance Lake. Anyways, the campers are particularly traumatized by Last Chance Lake, probably because of the whiplash from the 2 campsites. But they're shown video messages from their family members telling them to keep going and to not give up. The video messages from their parents are typically a reason for people at Last Chance Lake to want to stay, but ultimately the group does lose its first $5,000 when Solomon, the bitch baby I mentioned before, ends up quitting after his stay at Last Chance Lake. So he fully survives a night at Last Chance Lake and then decides, I haven't learned anything. This is kind of ultimately a relief for the cast, considering the fact that Solomon is the one who started most, if not all, of the fights at this point, and is the person who had the idea to steal half the food, like I mentioned before. In fact, when Rationsgate, as I like to call it, happens in like the first couple of episodes, Solomon is the one who starts calling people ugly, losers, and broke. I should also mention that Solomon is the reason why they got caught for stealing the food, because he is one of the people who has a crush on Devin, like everybody does in this show, apparently. And he decides to give her some vegan chocolate, which is vegan, and some marshmallows, which are not always vegan.
Freeze! Vegan police! Vegan police!
And Devin is, like, rightfully really pissed about this. Like, dude, what the hell? You're not gonna make me feel better by telling me you stole food from me? Solomon to me kind of strikes me as somebody who just does things for the plot, which is why he was such good reality TV, but ultimately kind of brings the show down in its kind of wholesome attempt to make kids better. Because while he's willing to actually do the challenges, he refuses to learn anything from them, and ultimately does nothing but really complain and bitch. So with the loss of Solomon, they add in the middle of the season this girl named Francesca, who ultimately doesn't really do anything except for show halfway through how the contestants have grown, because they get to like educate her about what they've been going through since she came. They're like, dude, we skinned a deer. And it does give the viewers once again this sense of catharsis for seeing another snowflake get their dream shattered. Like, they go through this entire initiation process of, like, showing Francesca the campsite and getting her shit thrown into the lake. But it also gives the contestants the opportunity to teach Francesca about the experience and really welcome her into the group, thus kind of showcasing some of the leadership and teamwork skills that they've learned throughout the season. So in the second half of the season, the show really finds its groove, despite constant curveballs from the producers that are sort of kind of, like, non sequiturs. It should also be said about the challenges, I forgot to say this earlier, that a lot of the challenges they face are basically straight out of team building handbooks. Like, I worked in outdoor education for a second, and a lot of the stuff that they're doing with these Gen Zers that is supposed to be so hard and like survival skilly are just things that I did at a basic suburban summer camp. High ropes courses, breaking a board with your hand to showcase your inner strength. It's like Boy Scouts meets Survivor meets summer camp. But every challenge is, of course, played off like it is the end of the world, the hardest thing they've ever done for these kids, which I completely understand if you've lived a life of luxury, if you lived in a larger city and you maybe didn't have access to nature camps like I worked at. I understand how this could be totally a new experience for you. Anyways, Deandra is named Wilderness Warrior after learning her lesson at Last Chance Lake, and she really shows the most growth in the second half of the season. Ray was really the front runner for the first part of the season because of her positive attitude, but she kind of gets lost in the mix because they say that she was like getting too comfortable with her positive attitude, which I think is a little bit bullshit, but like if it's for the plot, it's for the plot. And of course other standouts are Liam, who originally was just twerking everywhere and having a good time, and now is actually taking the challenges seriously, and Sunny, who didn't want to be there at all for the first day, and then skinned a deer and everything got better. It's almost like the more reluctance you had at the beginning of the show, the more it pays off by the end of the show, because you really can see the most growth. It's kind of like The Biggest Loser. The Biggest Loser is like super problematic, and I completely understand that, but the whole entire point of the show is to see people who are really, really large become really, really small. And so the larger you start at the beginning, the more impressive it is that you get smaller and smaller by the end. Thus the title, The Biggest Loser. Fuck that show. That's beside the point. The show concludes with the remaining cast members climbing a literal mountain. And this is all well and good despite the constant complaining. But honestly, I relate to this one. Out of all of the challenges, the only one that I possibly would tap out on would be climbing up a mountain. And in fact, someone does have to tap out. Not willfully, it's not like he quit or anything. A guy named Carl literally just dislocates his knee and shoulder, and thus has to be forcefully removed from the mountain. We haven't really talked a lot about Carl because the only thing I can really think about with Carl is that he started the show with a massive ego problem and doesn't really show much change until after his injury, in the same way that, like, everybody has a harrowing change after they tear their ACL in high school. Like, football was my life, then I tore my ACL, now I've learned human empathy. I don't understand how that works. But we'll give it to him, because he does show some significant change and actually apologizes to Joel and Matt for losing his temper, which is how he ended up dislocating his shoulder and knee, because he throws his backpack in a fit of rage and then starts wailing. I have never heard a grown man cry like this. I would say it's actually one of the more disturbing moments of the show, is watching this man completely break down because he has both a painful injury and is fighting his own battle. He is the one who starts the challenge as the leader, as the one who is guiding them up the mountain, because he wanted to take charge. He's the only one who really wants to climb the mountain. And then he goes out in a fit of ego, which is really sad. Honestly, when I think about a lot of the stuff that's happened in this show, it does get kind of dark sometimes. But it's the kind of dark where you can't really think about it too much or else you're gonna get sad. Kinda like, but not as severe as the first 2 seasons of The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. Much like The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, a lot of this is played off for drama or laughs, when if you think about it too deeply, it gets a little morose. And anyways, once Carl is gone, Liam really takes charge and leads the team up the mountain, and they all make it there despite some of them having fears of heights, despite some of them being tired, despite a lot of them complaining about their bodies hurting or just not being in good enough shape for this. Anyways, they get to the top of the mountain, everything's great, and then they go back down the mountain and have their final campfire, where Deandra is eventually rewarded the $50,000. Oh yeah, the $50,000 is back to being $50,000 once they reach the top of the mountain, I think, because good behavior? Oh, they also get all their stuff back, because it turns out the blowing up of their stuff was a fake out, which I still would love to know how they pulled that, like, large sleight of hand. And then we get a montage to see what all the kids are doing now. Most of them have jobs, have moved out of their parents' house. Deandra has spent the $50,000 starting a beauty business, which is super cool. And we learn that Sunny has a podcast, which is very much what I would expect from someone with those glasses. So yes, it seems that this social experiment of sorts has worked. And it's not that I didn't expect it to work, honestly. I kind of knew it was going to happen by the first episode. I couldn't have predicted someone calling someone a broke ass, but I could have predicted that they would all learn their lesson by the end of a great journey. I don't like the conclusion that I filmed for this video, so I'm back here on my phone, which is better camera quality anyway, but the first camera quality was an aesthetic choice. I digress. I want to reinstate my final thoughts. My final thoughts on this show is that I don't think that the premise of the show really lives up to the potential that it could. If you're gonna tell me that all these kids are snowflakes and entitled, I want you to tell me why. Why did they get here? How did they get here? It can't just be because they're all a part of a horrible, broken generation. This show could really say something about intergenerational friendships, because they do end up being friends with Matt and Joel by the end of the show. And they all have such different perspectives. Matt and Joel being military men, and none of them having military experience. You know what I mean? They have completely different life experiences, and yet they find common ground through self-respect and things like that. And while I don't agree with some of the military tactics used on the show, because of the military-industrial complex, I do understand why they were used, and I completely understand the perspective that Matt and Joel are coming from and have to respect it. And I just wish the same respect was given to the contestants. Why are they the way they are? No one is born in a vacuum. They're all born into circumstances, into households, into socioeconomic statuses, into many different factors that make them who they are, that factor into why they become the person they become, the defense mechanisms that they develop, the social skills that they develop. Solomon's probably not just a bitch baby, as I have been referring to him as. He's probably a broken person, or a defensive person, or a person who has had trauma, or a person who has had hardship. But we don't know any of that because the show didn't tell us. We are just told that they are snowflakes because they are part of Generation Z, and that's about it. And the only way to change that is through hard work and effort, like the previous generations. As if every generation has had a problem with the generation that comes after them. As if the generation literally didn't name themselves the greatest generation and then shit on the generation that we called baby boomers, and then baby boomers shit on millennials, and now we're shitting on Gen Z. So yeah, overall, I think that the show could definitely use some work, but it does a pretty good job of being entertaining, which I think is all it's meant to be, and maybe I'm just analyzing this far too deeply. Anyways, this video is far too long anyways, and I hope you have a lovely day, and thank you for watching, and please subscribe. Ew, please subscribe? Ugh, who am I? I don't like it.